Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just setting up. We'll be starting in a second. If you haven't seen, although don't watch it now, because we're going live, as always, there is a new Forgotten Fairy Tale up. This one's a Mexican story. I am quite certain I butchered the pronunciations, but it's a pretty cool story, so check it out when we're done. Otherwise, just sit tight while I get it set up. Like I said, just bear with me. I'll be starting in one moment. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 42nd episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'm just delighted that this is the 42nd episode because I am a giant nerd, as we've talked about many times. And for those of you who don't know, and shame on you if you don't, 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. If you're not familiar with why, read the book, or really the series, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 5 books, 1 short story, and 1 continuation by Ian Koff. The main books all written by, of course, Douglas Adams. So the one thing I want to hit on real quick, mostly because today is, as I film this, is of course September 11th, and September 11th, 2001. There's nobody watching this that doesn't know what happened that day. And just going to take a moment for those who died, and for those of us who are still around, especially for the families of those who died in the tragedy. Okay. The only other thing, it's not really related to the show, although down the road, or tonight's show, I should say, down the road, I do want to try and get a Muslim on, as well as a rabbi, a Christian, and other religious figures to talk about, just to educate people about their religious beliefs, because I think it's very valuable to be aware of the beliefs of other people in the world, other than your own. Even though that, a Muslim, a rabbi, and a priest walk into a YouTube channel sounds like the start of a joke. Maybe it'll be funny. Although, granted, I'm not planning on having them all on the same time. The reality is there are a lot of Muslims in the world. Let me just take a look. Okay, according to a study done by the Pew Research Center, there are about 3.3 million Muslims living in the United States. As of 2015, in fact. That would make them about 1% of the total U.S. population. It's expected that'll double by 2050. Now, the thing to realize, and this is important, I'm going to go into great detail, is that most Muslims are not violent people. There are exceptions, as there are in all faiths, but the vast majority of them are not violent people. Even things you hear about that get distorted by certain people in the media, like Sharia law, aren't as widespread in the real world as people imagine. It's a really important topic, I think, to talk about, and to talk about its origins, but I really would prefer to get a Muslim on here, just because I'm an outsider. I can talk about it from an academic perspective, but my knowledge is limited. It's not the demon that people think it is a central point I'm trying to make here. The majority of Muslims abroad and in the United States are not violent people. And actually quite a few of them are as horrified and opposed to the extremists as everyone else is. And a number of the leaders have said so. But, okay, let's move on to tonight's topic. So, if, as you might have noticed last time around, when I talked about cults, it was kind of depressing for me, talking about all of the people that died at Jonestown, all of the people that died, in the Heaven's Gate debacle, the Branch Davidian debacle, and of course before that we did serial killers with the great break of having Stephen Lancaster on, which was enormous fun. I won't deny it. If you haven't seen that interview, I do recommend going and checking it out after we're done tonight. But the first thing I thought is, why don't I do something cheerful? Break up the doom and gloom that tends to pervade this show, and do something friendly, cheerful, light, and happy, just to cheer myself up, if nothing else. And then I thought a little more about that. It's like, no, can't do it. Not me. Not this show. And instead, I've decided to kind of go back to the roots. Got a little further afield, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And down the road, I have plenty of other topics that aren't quite as direct to get into. But tonight we're going to talk about demonology. Specifically, we're going to talk about how demonic attack works, what it looks like, what makes it different from having, what's the difference between having a ghost in your house and a demon? How can you tell? Often, though, it's not real hard to tell one from the other. Which we'll get into, but sometimes they can be very clever and very subtle. But the critical thing to start off this discussion is a concept. Well, it's the stages of demonic attack. There's 5 of them, 3 to 5, depending on how you defined it. For our purposes, we're going to go with 5. The first stage is technically before the attack begins, and the last stage is the final point of which the attack ends, neither of which lasts terribly long, but they're necessary. But the first stage is absolutely necessary for everything that comes after it, and the last stage is where it's all going. So it does factor into the structure. Now, ghosts are a thing. If anyone out there is listening to this, I get from Christians all the time, in particular, that there are no ghosts out there. It's all demons in disguise. I did a whole episode on ghosts, and I go through and lay out. No, they're not the same thing. Here's even biblical evidence to show that human spirits exist. Although for the purposes of sanity and clarification, I'm going to even though I've done this before, I'm going to start by defining the nature of the beast. What's a ghost? What's a demon? What's an elemental? What's a fairy? And what are the different players in the spirit world, as it were? And keep in mind, this is a fraction of what's out there. I've seen a lot of weird things. Not just people tend to look at demonologists like Ed and Lorraine or Lou or myself and tend to think all they ever see is demons. No, that's not true. Now, a large portion of the cases I get involved with are demonic, and there's a real simple reason for that, which is called, my group is Delaware Valley Demonology Research. When you're looking for a ghost group because Aunt Mildred is coming by once a week and watching you while you sleep and then going away again, you don't contact Delaware Valley Demonology Research. You just don't. Lou used to put it very well. We're not the people you call because you hear footsteps in the hallway at night. We're the people you call because you're in a hotel room and you're too afraid to come home. By the way, is chat working? You guys are really quiet tonight. I mean, the screen says I've got people watching. I'm just wondering if you're all like crickets or what. What's the deal, folks? Don't be shy. I don't usually bite, and I'm not in the mood to tonight. But okay, so okay. Hi, Circuit Man. So okay, there is life out there. Hooray! So, like I said, before I get into the anatomy of demonic attack, let's clarify what I mean by a demon, what I mean by a devil, how they differ from other types of spirits. So, specifically when a Christian demonologist talks about demons, and non-Christians who study demons generally agree. I'm actually reading a 10th anniversary edition of John Michael Greer's Monsters, an Investigator's Guide to Magical Beings, and he used the same overall definition of demons I do, and he's a druid, and ceremonial magician, so very different perspective than mine. But a demon is a spirit being, which ghosts are spirit beings, angels are spirit beings, fairies are spirit beings. It's a very vague term, but so they're not a solid figure, not flesh and blood. But what makes them significant is, one, they're inherently malevolent. Spirits that I would define as demonic always have two, aside from being inhuman, have two basic characteristics. One is an intense hatred of the living. They don't like us. They don't like people. They're very resentful. And based on EVP sessions and interviews that have taken place as part of exorcisms, they don't like the fact that we have physical forms and they don't. The other is an intense hatred for the divine in all of its forms. Those are the two major characteristics of inhuman. Hates the divine, hates man. That's what makes it a demon. Now, you'll get into questions of, where do demons come from? The traditional answer is fallen angels. But if you go way back to the early episodes, I go into greater detail about what demons are and their origins, and there are other theories other than fallen angels. I'm just trying to get it through a real quick definitions here, so we have something useful to work with. I don't want to retread that much ground. Whereas a ghost is a spirit of a living thing that has since died. Usually, it's a human's. It's a somebody dies. It's their spirit. But that's not even all examples of ghosts. There's also other types of hauntings, which excuse me, are quite different. There's what they call a residual haunting, which is actually less an intelligent spirit in the sense that most people would think, and more that a series of emotionally charged events replay themselves over and over and over again. Like there are houses where you hear a shot. You might hear a shot ring out like a bullet from a gun, a scream, some heavy footsteps walking away, and it's the site of a murder. Where guy shot a woman, and what you're hearing lines up. And what differentiates it from a normal haunting is, whereas ghosts usually have a bit of intelligence to them, it's the same sequence of events that just repeat each other itself over and over and over again. And it usually is tied to something very emotional. There's a whole theory in parapsychology about this, and that certain rock strata particularly can record emotional occurrences, which is a really interesting theory and way off topic. But the point is, when I talk about a ghost, it's a human spirit, broadly speaking, or animal spirit. They function essentially the same way, except that most animal spirits that people encounter, with some exceptions, are pets. There's a theory that the late Lou Gentili had, and I don't entirely subscribe to this, but I'm not certain, that the traditional Christian idea that animals don't have souls, but if a human loves an animal enough, like you particularly love and care for your pet, it can be imbued with a soul, and that's why pets come back, but other types of animal spirits usually don't. As I'm saying, I don't necessarily agree with this philosophy, although it does answer the interesting question of if, as other religions believe, all animals have souls, why is the world not overrun with cockroach ghosts? And there are other possible explanations to that conundrum. Most obviously being it may be something unique to more complex forms of life. But we don't really know. This is largely speculative. Personally, I'm inclined to think all things that animals have a spirit or soul, but most of them, because they don't have higher brain function, simply pass on, and it's unique to the emotional energy attached to a pet is why they're the ones that usually stick around. Where usually with a ghost, the human spirit's emotions tie them to a place. It's animals don't, ghosts have unfinished business. Animals maybe don't have the sentience to have unfinished business, but if somebody cares for them and misses them, it may create that. It's an interesting subject. It's off topic, and it's purely speculative. I would be very skeptical of anyone who absolutely says they know the answer to these questions. So, other types of spirits that are out there are angels, or technically it would be more accurate to say holy angels, because demons in Judeo-Christian, and particularly Christian, philosophy are fallen angels. Holy angels are the ones that are still loyal to God. But holy angels are inhuman spirits, because they, like demons, they've never had physical form, but they're loyal to God, and they are, one doesn't want to say benevolent, but they are not inherently hostile to humans. And the thing about angels is holy angels do not haunt houses. I hesitate to say ever because I don't want to put. I'm not in the habit of restricting what the divine cannot do. But I've never heard of a case of a holy angel haunting a location or person or object. Um, Generally speaking, if they're here, they have a purpose, they have a mission, they have a goal. They accomplish that and they move on. They don't hang around making the lights flicker. Um, if anybody knows of an example, a contradictory example, please tell me because I'd be curious. Um, so, of course, you could also argue guardian angels, but guardian angels again don't behave like hauntings, demonic or human. There are other types of spirits out there. There are elementals. Elementals are, I guess, insofar as possible, in some ways, the closest thing to an angelic haunting. Um, Elementals are spirits that are generally believed to serve God, but they serve the purpose of protecting the natural world. Are usually strongly tied to the four classic elements: earth, air, fire, water. You can, and we've talked about this in the past as well, you can get elemental hauntings. And they tend to be very violent and very bad. Usually because you pissed something off. And they're usually very difficult to get rid of because, again, they actually do have a degree of divine authority in what they're doing. Then you have fairies, which are weird. No, I've actually, I will say I have actually had encounters with fairies in the past, which fairies themselves are probably an interesting thing to do its episode on, and I could talk about my experiences with them. But suffice to say, they're like elementals. They're usually, and they're often tied to elementals, in that people think that's basically what they are. But they're tied to the land. They're usually tied to specific locations. Traditionally, throughout the world, people have done various things to appease them, and if you appease them, they do good things for you. For example, in some parts of rural England, it's still traditional to leave honey, milk, or bread out to appease what essentially amounts to the fairies, and if you do, your crops will grow better, and you won't have various negative spirits in your house and things of that nature. The thing to realize about fairies is they operate under their own rules. They aren't usually, they seem to be fascinated by us, but they don't usually meddle in our affairs a lot, unless you give them reason to. And a lot of the times with the fairy haunting, and they do happen, the solutions are a lot less dramatic than dealing with a demonic or even an elemental force. Case in point, there's a house my friend Father Joe talked about before he passed in Maryland, I want to say. And not a house, it was a bar. But it was like a high-priced bar, like a country club type of situation. The owners were rich, the clientele was rich. But every night they'd lock up, and they'd come back the next morning and the place was in shambles. It was always locked up, they'd set guards, they did various things, they could never figure out why. But the place was always destroyed, and it was always in very specific patterns, like people were passing through it. Finally, they talked to priests, they talked to various people. Finally, somebody had the bright idea of talking to somebody who was familiar with the folklore of the area and Irish folklore to various extents, and they hit upon the idea of building a garden and fountain and other natural things on the property. And the owners did this because they had the money to spare, and the clientele was happy enough with it. And the problems in the bar stopped. Another example of what to do in this kind of situation is, if they're causing a ruckus through your bar in a specific pattern, clear the tables and things and give them space to move. Because according to folklore, there are processions of fairies. And if you block the procession, it'll piss them off. Or leaving out traditional offerings, bread, milk, honey, things of that nature. But again, that's really not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is demons. As an aside, there are lots of other types of spirits out there. we could be here all night listing all of the types. Um, but a lot of the weirder types aren't necessarily likely to haunt a house. They're not. You interact with them less. Like there's various the Native American spirits, particularly totemic spirits. People interact with them in different ways. Usually, actually, often with totemic spirits, if anything, is more reminiscent of Christians interacting with guardian angels. But they're not. They're not threatening. Specifically, my job as a demonologist is to deal with spirits that pose a threat to a person, not to deal with all the various weird types of spirit phenomenon out there. That is, because reality is, if every night you get woken up at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, and see a little pixie flitting around your room, and that's it. It doesn't do nothing to you. You don't do nothing to it. It eventually flies off, and that's the end of the story. Well, there isn't a whole lot of problem. There isn't a whole lot of need for somebody like me to get involved. Don't poke it with... And it's a good rule of thumb with the spirit world. Don't go poking things with sticks for no reason. There's plenty of spirit beings out there, all over the world, of varying types, that are very dangerous if you piss them off, but are harmless if you leave them alone. So again, especially if you don't know what you're doing, and I'm not addressing this specifically to experienced magicians and pagan traditions that do know what they're doing, but the average schmo, if you see something weird, observe it and don't. If it interacts with you, maybe politely interact back, but otherwise just leave it to bleep alone. Don't start problems. Don't start a problem for no reason. It's just good advice in general. In the real world, just don't start shit for no reason. It doesn't end well. So, the anatomy of a demonic attack. Now, when a house is haunted by a ghost, usually it's something that the person did in life that ties them to the house and death. Usually the house is very important to them. Somebody might haunt their favorite house they built with their own two hands from that, and have lived in for 40 years and raised their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in. With demons, it's a different kettle of fish. Whereas if you live in a house with a ghost, you are very unlikely to have anything to do with why your house has a ghost. If you live in a house with the demon, most of the time, and again, the critical thing here is most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, you did something stupid. There are basically three major and one minor ways that people wind up with a demon in their house, which is our first stage, which gets referred to as grounds, and I did a whole episode on grounds early on. It's called How Do Demons Enter Your Life. Feel free to go check that out for a much more detailed explanation of this whole concept. But we need to touch on it here, basically, for the rest of it to make sense. This, as a stage, it's usually referred to as invitation. The reason why they're here is referred to as grounds. For the most part, if you have a demon in your life, you invited it in. This usually happens through one of two means. One is commonly called the law of invitation, which is if you invite something into your house, it can come in. If you start practicing satanic rituals, you really don't have a reason to complain if you have demons in your house. You invited them in directly and overtly. One of the most common ways this happens is actually the use of Ouija boards. Dear crap, do they cause trouble? Various other occult practices. And in general, untrained people trying to reach out and chat with the spirit world randomly is not a good idea. There are mediums for that matter, and usually either either mediums into things they shouldn't be, or mediums that are very inexperienced that actually wind up communicating with demons, disguising themselves as people. But most of the time, that's not the case with mediums. Usually, they're either contacting the dead or they're just imagining the entire scenario, or for that matter, quite a few of them are making it up. Oh, and hi, Freaky Frank. I'm very happy to hear that you love the Forgotten Fairy Tales segment. Those will be continuing. I'm always working on new stories, and I'm glad that so far it's had a very positive response, and I love doing it. If anyone out there is listening who hasn't checked them out, I encourage you to do so. I'm real quick because it's not on topic. I'm basically picking lesser known fairy tales, folk tales, and myths from all over the world. I call it Forgotten Fairy Tales because I'm specifically trying to stick to stories that people aren't as familiar with. Down the road, I'm probably going to do the story of Little Red Riding Hood or the story of Aladdin. But I'm going even if I do, I'm going to do the original Brothers Grimm, or even one of the older versions before Brothers Grimm or Arabian Nights. And because just to highlight how different the original story was from the Disney versions we all know and love. Dear crap, the Snow Queen. I'm actually going to do the Snow Queen coming up soon, I think. For those of you who don't know, real quickly, it's a story from Hans Christian Andersen that was loosely based on, or loosely, I should say, the basis for the movie Frozen. The original fairy tale, just to give a minor spoiler, actually involves a mirror that was created by the devil himself. So yeah, it's a little different than Disney flick. But that's a little off topic. Again, thank you, Freaky Frank. I appreciate the support. Thank you to everyone else who watches the Forgotten Fairy Tale segment. Well, please feel free to put in the in chat if you're here now, or in the comments on individual stories what you like. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to cover. At the moment, I'm still trying to do the skip around the world thing of I've done Japanese, Russian, Mexican. I did an Aztec legend just recently. I've done Native American, or just tonight, in fact. I've done Native American legends, and I'm going to keep that up for at least for the time being, because I want to get a range of stories going from all different cultures. I may even eventually get into analysis, but for the moment, I'm just telling stories. Like I said, I have love for storytelling. So, invitation. To get on back on topic. Most of the time, you invite indirectly. Another way that invitation can happen is attraction. The concept's been misused into the book, The Law of Attraction, but real simple. What you do has spiritual consequences. People who do wicked things get wicked spirits. Child molesters, rapists, murderers, people who practice necrophilia, other disgusting, abhorrent behaviors that I don't think anyone in my listening audience is going to be offended when I say call murder, pedophilia, and rape horrible things. And every instance I personally know of a credible example of somebody letting a demon into their life because of their actions. It's been something horrible. It's been something everyone would consider horrible. You'll find books by various deliverance ministers that claiming that every aberrant behavior under the sun, according to that, or at least that they could see as aberrant, can get you possessed by demons. And they're full of it. There's the one particular nut job who, aside from thinking that Ouija boards and astrology and those types of things will do it, also thinks that practicing oral sex or playing video games, eating junk food, homosexuality, and to the surprise of, I'm sure, no one, are all caused by demonic possession. He's nuts. But at any rate, doing evil things draws evil spirits. Real simple concept. And I've said this many times before, and I'll say this again. By saying this, I am not saying that rapists are rapists because they're demonically possessed. I'm saying that sometimes rapists are demonically possessed because they're rapists. It's a price for your actions, not a cause of. There are two other ways that you can get a demon in your life. One is fairly common, one is absurdly rare. The first way that's actually very common and unfortunate is you move into a house that already has a demon in it. This happens. The original movie, The Conjuring. The family didn't practice satanic ritual. Somebody else on the property practiced satanic ritual, and they moved in and inherited somebody else's problem. And oh no, Circuit Man says practicing oral sex causes possession. Sounds like someone just doesn't want to reciprocate. Oh no, that one, he has demons dedicated to both varieties of oral sex. It's not just a reciprocation thing. He thinks the whole thing's wrong. He really is that crazy. But at least he's an equal opportunity nutcase, I guess. But okay, so you can move into a house that somebody else already did something stupid in. This was probably the case in Amityville. This was the case. May or may not have been the case in the Perron house, which is the basis for The Conjuring. I say may or may not because it's definitely the case in the movie. I don't know about the original. I'm not familiar enough with the original case. It's fairly common, but at least in my experience, most of the time somebody did something. Often the two overlap. You have a demonic spirit in your house. You start fooling around with the Ouija board and it goes from being dormant to being woken up. The last way is very, very, very rare, which is what's called a soul victim. In a soul victim case, you don't do anything. You don't invite it in. You don't do something horrible and bring it in. You don't even move into a house that has a demon in it. You are a person who is so holy and pious and good that itself makes you vulnerable to attack. There's plenty of biblical basis for this concept, but in more practical, real life, recent examples, there's the case of Annalise Michel. If you've seen the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, it's it's based on her story. There's a couple of other movies that have been done closer to the original. If she was in fact possessed, and that is an open question as far as I've studied, and I'm not an expert on the case by any means. But if she was actually demonically possessed, she was an example of a soul victim. Another more ready example of a soul victim would have been Saint Pio, aka Padre Pio, who wasn't possessed by demonic spirits, but he came under attack from them on a regular basis. Okay, so Freaky Frank wants to know what to do to get rid of something that's following him. If that's something specific, email me, because it's a fairly long discussion and I need more information. I'm putting my email into the chat now. If it's a general question, it's a very good question. It's something I really, except in very broad terms, it's hard to describe here. The short version is get a priest of your faith to bless, or have at least compatible faith to bless the house. If you have Ouija boards or books on black magic or anything else, get rid of them. The recommended method is take them to the nearest church and leave them there with a note asking the priest dispose of them properly. Most of the time, getting the house blessed and getting rid of any objects like that you have present will end the phenomenon all by itself. If you've already done those things, or you do those things and it doesn't work, I highly recommend emailing an experienced group, because we can help. We can help you, but it's more detailed than that. I'll wind up. I think next episode I'm going to try. Actually, was going to try to get a guest for this coming week. But so either this coming week, or the following week, I'm going to wind up dealing with solid advice on what to do if your house is haunted. I think if you go back through the episodes, there is details on that as well. But we'll get into greater depth. But anyway, like I said, Frank, email me. I will review it and get back to you probably later tonight or tomorrow at the latest. There's definitely things you can do, and there's things we can do to help. Yes, Circuit Man's absolutely right. One of the most basic bits of advice is, if you have something violent in your house, don't try to get rid of it yourself. Here's the thing. There's lots of recipes on the internet for do-it-yourself house blessings. In the majority, if you don't have something in your house, do-it-yourself house blessings are probably not going to cause you any problems. They're probably not going to work either. If you have something in your house, if they don't work, and there's a good chance they won't, you're gonna piss it off. The basic reason to get a priest to do it instead of trying to do it yourself is, if you try to get rid of it yourself and you piss the spirit off instead of getting rid of it, what are you going to do? The priest knows what to do and should ideally either have the experience and training himself, or be able to reach it. Like with a Catholic priest, will be able to reach the diocese exorcist, or a nearby diocese exorcist. But yeah, you're in the right place. We will be able to help you. I do local investigations for Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New York, Maryland. And then I can get you in touch. If you don't live anywhere near me, I can get you in touch with groups that can help you further afield. It's worth saying the Atlantic Paranormal Society TAPS has an excellent webpage to help you get in contact with groups all over the country that are reputable groups. And TAPS itself is a good group, is a reputable group. So there is definitely sane help out there. In fact, when I get into what to do when you're under attack next episode, I'll wind up getting into how to tell a good group from a bad group. Okay, Wilkes-Barre. Yeah, that's local enough to me that I can help. I would be able to come out to help. Actually, I had a case in Wilkes-Barre years back. That's sort of interesting. At least I think it was Wilkes-Barre. Half the time with these cases, I don't even know which town they happened in. Anymore. I just either I went to a set of followed a set of directions, and that's how I got there, or I'd go with Lou and he knew how to get there, or simply I've forgotten intervening years. But no, I'm in New Jersey. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I know Wilkes-Barre. Yeah, you have a point, Circuit Man. I should probably start keeping case files. I have a very good memory, and I tend to rely on that more than I should. But no, in fact, even if I can't readily get out there, which is always a possibility. I know an extremely good group in Pennsylvania, Paranormal Research, um, Paranormal Society for Research and Education is an excellent group that's run by a friend of my, by friends of mine that can also be of help. So there is no shortage of help if you live in Pennsylvania. That will definitely get you in touch with the people you need, or deal with it ourselves. Is it World? I'm trying to. I think it was Wilkes-Barre I did the one case in, and it had a house from the Revolutionary War with forge from the Revolutionary War across the street. It's one of the most bizarre cases I've ever done. It's one of the most bizarre cases anyone's ever done. Lou was absolutely baffled by it, and Lorraine Warren were baffled by it. The exorcist we brought in, who was very experienced, was baffled by it. Because what would happen is, if you performed an exorcism on the house, it went to the forge. If you performed the exorcism on the forge, it went back to the house. The only way to ultimately resolve the situation was a simultaneous exorcism at both locations at the same time. I'd have to look up. There are haunted houses just about everywhere. But, okay, to get back on track. So the point is, the spirit gets into your life somehow. And from that point, you get the what's more properly the first stage. Because this is where activity actually starts. Which is called infestation. Most of the time, when a demonic haunting is confused with a human spirit haunting, it's at the infestation stage of the game, because the two operate very similarly. Yeah, some people are paranormal magnets. There's a list of reasons why that can happen. People that are sensitives or psychics are often magnets. Family curses can make you a magnet. Close association with someone who's practicing some form of magic can make you a magnet. There's without going into detailed case history, which this isn't really the forum for doing so. It's impossible to pick one reason and go, oh, that's why you're a magnet. At any rate, infestation usually starts just like a regular haunting. You get footsteps, you get weird noises, you get weird smells, usually very foul smells, smells of excrement, smells of urine. You'll get growling noises, you'll get voices and guttural voices that sound barely human. Sometimes they'll be speaking in foreign languages, the classical languages, ancient Greek, the various forms of ancient Greeks, Latin. Oh yeah, send me the pictures, and this is a really common thing I get, and I want to address real briefly, that people who contact me for help often are worried I'm going to think they're crazy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm someone who willingly identifies themselves as a demonologist and paranormal investigator. Lots of people think I'm crazy. I've seen people possessed by demons. I've seen black imp-shaped figures sitting on beds. I've seen beds move. I've seen objects move of their own accord. I have heard things growl at me from places that nothing could be. I do crazy. Trust me, as crazy as you think whatever has happened to you is, I've probably heard of worse. That actually, and I mean worse, it's actually happened, not just the crazy, because I've heard plenty of things that happen that are actually pretty strange. And sometimes, yeah, people are kind of crazy. So, Okay, like I said, one of the classic forms that early phenomenon will take is very subtle. But it gets reported a lot, which is that late in the night, often around 3 a.m., and we'll get back to 3 a.m. and threes in general briefly. You will hear 3 knocks on your front door. You'll go down, you open the door, and there's nobody there. Now, if this happens on a normal day, you call it a ding dong ditch and move on. When that happens, and then as time progresses, more and more bizarre phenomenon happens. Sometimes it's the beginning. That's the beginning stage. It often gets dismissed, but it again gets back into this concept that we were talking about invitation. It's the spirit creating a symbolic sign of its arrival. So what makes this different than a haunting? Because so far ghosts do everything I've just said. First of all, there's a level of power involved. Now, ghosts move physical objects pretty often. Demons move physical objects as well. Now, when a ghost moves a physical object, it's small. You're talking about something that weighs usually a pound or less. Some, at most, if it's really trying, maybe as many as 10 pounds. If books are floating through the air, it's quite likely a ghost. If your refrigerator levitates off the ground, yeah, that's not a ghost. Ghosts don't exhibit that kind of power. It doesn't automatically mean demon. Elementals also can do that, but you got something big and problematic in your house if it's moving something that big. Then the other thing you'll get with demonic haunting that can be very strange is what they call apports, objects that will appear from nowhere. Sometimes these can be incredibly bizarre, but you'll get feces, you'll get urine, you'll get blood is very common, slime. Occasionally, you'll get really weird things, beer. In one very strange case, the Warrens investigated the walls of the house dripped V8 juice, which makes considerably more sense if you know that the father of the family living in the house had a violent anaphylactic level allergy to tomato products. Because otherwise, why the hell would a demon use V8 juice? Where it comes from, nobody knows. One of the speculations is that because that demons basically can take component matter, atoms from the area and reconstitute them into something. I have no idea. No one really knows for certain if that's true. But it does happen. The other side of that is that disapparitions, things disappear. Things get moved by ghosts. You may, find your keys moved from your night dresser where you left it the night before to the top of your refrigerator, and it's like you're the only one in the house that night. You've never put them on top of your refrigerator before. How the hell did they get there? But with ghosts, usually you find it again. With demons, it's often gone for good. Also, ghosts usually choose things that have very little importance or value. Where demons will specifically target things that are very personally valuable to you, or money. Money disappears out of demonically haunted houses with a fair degree of regularity. There's a question of where the hell all this goes. Then again, there are certain Satanists, I mean real Satanists, not just the Anton LaVey types, that don't work, but still always have money. You have to wonder sometimes. And I'm not saying this is where, nobody knows. There may be some cave deep under the earth that has a huge stack of wallets in it. Or maybe they just toss it in a volcano, or toss it into space, toss it into a black hole, toss it into the sun. There's plenty of places to stick something, is my point. Very, 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 very rarely this will even happen with people. Very high level demonic, or diabolical technically, which is devils. Spirits can make entire people disappear and never return. I know only of a handful of times of this happening. It was something horribly bad that did it. Elementals may be able to do it. Spontaneous human combustion is probably also on the table in this sort of situation. And demons will also cause fire out of nowhere. But at any rate, the critical thing when you're dealing... And the other big difference between demonic hauntings and human spirit hauntings is the prevalence of the number 3. It's very easy if you start looking for a pattern, it's usually easy to find it, even if it isn't really there. But with demonic hauntings, things happen in threes with a regularity and a consistency that you don't need to look for. Like going back to what I said before, at the beginning of the whole thing, you'll hear 3 knocks at the door at 3 a.m. and nobody's there. And that may be repeated over the course of several nights. Always 3 knocks. 1, 2, 3, stop. In the Annabelle case, they found they'd found on several occasions 3 drops of blood in various places. 3 claw marks appeared on people. Activity in demonic cases is usually at its highest point at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why is all this the case? Well, in Christianity, in paganism, in Buddhism, in a number of other major religions, 3 is a number traditionally associated with God. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, we can rule of 3. Remember, the 2 characteristics of demonic spirits: they hate humans, they hate God. By acting in 3, it's a minor form of blasphemy. Further, in Catholic lore and Christian lore in general, it was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that Jesus Christ actually died on the cross. Demons, another classic sign of demonic activity is things happening in reverse. So the opposite of 3 p.m. is 3 a.m. And again, that's another common, you'll see weird birds that shouldn't be there, but they all only fly on the left side of you. Okay, we cut out for a second. I don't have the ability to show the pictures at the moment, so I won't wind up showing it. If I do at some point in the future, of course, I will be happy to cover the faces of anyone that's in the picture, just out of respect for the privacy of the people involved. I'm a big believer in privacy. I'm not giving out personal information. As a rule, if you hear me talk about a case, if you hear me talk about people, especially if you hear me talk about names, I probably made the names up often enough. Good heavens. Even sometimes when I tell you it happened in a certain location, it didn't. Yeah, Frank, you've definitely got something going on in those photographs. We'll talk about it later, because I need to take the time to review the photographs, and I need to take the time to review the email itself, and then I'm going... expect a lot of questions, probably personal and prying and possibly somewhat embarrassing, which is a big reason why I won't go into a full case history here on the show, because there are things I need to ask you. There are things I'm going to probably need to ask you that you're really not going to want to make public knowledge. And for the sake of your privacy, we're not going to do that here. There are reasons I do the things I do the way that I do them. But yeah, looking at the pictures, yeah, it looks like you got something. Um, but moving on. So I got disconnected for a minute. So to reiterate what I was saying, usually, demonic activity is more violent than human spirits, and not subtly so. And on top, human spirit might throw a teacup against the wall. A demonic spirit's going to throw it at your head. And it may not be so nice as to use a teacup. It may use knives or plates or really heavy objects. The other side of that is that usually if you have a human spirit in your house, it wants attention. It's a person going, look at me, I'm not gone, I'm still here, pay attention to me. You pay it attention, the activity tends to subside. If it scares you, the activity tends to subside because the human spirits mostly don't want to scare people. They want some kind of acknowledgement. They have something they're trying to resolve and they want help with it, or they just want, I'm not dead. Somebody please notice the fact I'm not dead. And they scare you. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't mean to scare you. I'm sorry. Because with human spirits, you're dealing with human psychology. Granted, some of them do want to scare you, and some of them just have warped senses of humor, just like people do. But, in a demonic case, fear isn't a byproduct and isn't an accident, it's part of the plan. And it's the other thing you're running into with demonic spirits is ghosts are attention, are starved for attention, for the most part. They're going, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. When you're a kid and when you're a little kid and you're going to mom, look at me, mom, look at what I can do. Sort of thing, except people can't see them, which gets frustrating for spirits. They're just trying to get somebody to pay attention to them. On the other hand, demons are trying to destroy. They're trying to terrorize. They're trying to split people apart. The healthy, positive emotions are anathema to demonic spirits. They don't want happy families. They don't want loving homes. They don't want healthy relationships. Because the more of that you have, the easier it is to resist. As well, aside from the fact that positive, just as demons are drawn to positive emotion, they're driven back by, or drawn to negative emotions, they're driven back by positive ones. So they're trying to destroy things. They're trying to tear things down. They're trying to ruin families. It's not uncommon to see in a number of cases demonic, and this is not true of all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but it's fairly common that you have unhappy homes, divorces, abuse, drug use, which it isn't necessarily to say that demons cause people to do all of these things. The vast majority of these times, these things have perfectly mundane explanations, but this is what it wants. Happy, well-adjusted people are poor targets for demons. On the other hand, how many happy, well-adjusted people do you know? If I meet any, I'll let you know. How's that sound? But at any rate, what it's doing at this point is it's picking somebody. It's finding its target. I'm not sure I'd say I like them because it indicates you've got a spirit in your house, Frank. But I do find the photos very interesting, which I guess is sort of like liking them. But it wants a specific target. Most of the time, it'll be the person that brought it into the house to begin with, if someone did. Not always, and that doesn't mean it's only ever going to target one person. Usually they go after multiple people. But it wants its specific target. Usually the specific target will have certain characteristics. Usually they're more psychologically vulnerable. Addicts are common enough targets. And it's, if you're an addict, it doesn't make you demonically possessed. Usually, no. The overwhelming majority of addicts are not under spiritual attack. But if you are an addict living in a demonically infested house, it makes you an easier target. Women, because they tend to be more emotionally open, are common targets. Particularly housewives historically have been popular targets, because the demon's mostly going to be bound to a specific area, at least until it gets bound to a person. Granted, it can follow, if the family... The common question you get with Amityville and the Smurl haunting and a lot of other cases is, why don't they just move? And the answer is, if they move, the spirit will just follow them, because it's bound to the people. But it doesn't... They usually don't, follow people to work. Also, it's a more public setting, and they want isolation. On the other hand, you have a housewife who spends all day at home alone. It makes them an easier target. The spirit has more time to work on them when no one else is around. It's not because women are weaker or in any way inferior. That is not what I mean. It's just a question of easy targeter. Because they're, as part of trying to break families apart and destroy healthy relationships, it's trying to isolate the members of the family. Another common thing that you will get, which relates to some of the other theories of how all of this works, is that one person in a family will see something other people won't. Sometimes you could have a family of 6 sitting in the living room watching TV, and this hulking black 8-foot tall figure comes down the stairs, walks into the center of the room, and then vanishes. But only one person in a room of 6 people, all awake and looking, only one person sees it. Or only 2 out of the 6 will see it. This could sometimes be because one person's psychic. Sometimes it's also deliberately manifesting to only one person to make that person look crazy. Again, when you're dealing with a demonic haunting, or especially a diabolical haunting, and for the point of clarification, devils, which are what are behind when I say diabolical, are like demons but more powerful. They're smarter, they're even better organized. A devil is more often, if you look at it in terms of an army, demons are the grunts. Demons are the guys in the trenches fighting the battle. Devils are the brass. They're the guys that are sitting well away from enemy lines, planning things out. They do get involved personally from time to time, but and when they do, everything's ramped up. But at any rate, the spirit is going to pick somebody out. And the activity is going to start to focus on that person more and more. And it's going to start to try to manipulate the person to get them to do what it wants. This operates very much like abusive relationships and torture. It is psychological and spiritual and often enough physical torture. But the spirit starts to manipulate them and get them to do things. Often it'll be real straightforward. It'll terrorize the person, isolate them because no one else in the family is seeing what they're seeing, or nobody else wants to admit they're seeing what they're seeing. And the spirit will make a deal. Do this thing for me, and I'll leave you alone. Person agrees. Spirit eases it up for a while. Then it comes back, and then it gets worse, and the spirit wants something else. To the point where the person starts to lose more and more of their willpower and their control. The entire point of an infestation and oppression, or sometimes oppression is also called obsession, and the two are fairly interrelated, is to erode the person's willpower, is to erode their ability to fight back. This is why, and I've talked about this before, and let's reiterate it again, that one of the most critical points to answer your question, Frank, when you're dealing with demonic phenomenon, you have to keep fighting it. You have to keep resisting it. Yes, Circuit Man, kill your family is one of the things it's going to get into, and that comes up a little further down the road when we get into the 5th and final stage of demonic attack. But it's trying to wear the person down. It's specifically looking to get the person to give in to a very important question. Now, the thing is, when most people think of demonic possession, most cases that people call demonic possession, the person's not actually possessed. The person's under heavy oppression. Heavy oppression, you start to lose your free will because you get to the point, psychologically speaking, where you'll do almost anything the spirit tells you to do just because you want it to stop. Even further, you can get to the point where, okay, I'll do anything, just stop. Okay, or you get even to Stockholm Syndrome level things where it doesn't matter if it stops or not. You're going to just you're a whipped dog that's going to do what you're told. Because it's not a healthy mindset, but it is a reality. Eventually, it's going to ask the big question. The big question can take a whole series of forms, but it comes down to it's going to ask permission to possess you. And this is the critical tipping point of the whole shebang. It wants possession. Why it wants possession is a very good question. The usual theory floated is that a demon's existence is painful and torturous for it. There's a theological concept that hell is not simply a physical location. Going to hell isn't like going to Pittsburgh, for example. It's a spiritual state. So even when a demon is here on earth, it's still in hell. It's still suffering like it's in hell. And being in a human body gives it some relief. Also, it gives it more room to play, because once it has possession of a human body, it can do just about everything it wants. And then moves into its final stage. But it wants somebody to say yes. Once it does, it sets up. This is true possession. This is when a spirit actually sets up shop in your body and is running the show. In the later stages of oppression, it may actually start to physically move in, or it may manipulate your body from the outside. In actual possession, it's living in your body all of the time. The family you just talked about from the movie, they still get the old 60s movie, The Entity? Just talked about from the movie The Entity. Circuit Man says, so joyriding is fun, just ask a teenager. But once actual possession sets in, all hell breaks loose, literally and figuratively. It's rare. Good heaven, is it rare? I've been at this more than 20 years now, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've actually seen a case of demonic possession. Yeah, pretty much. Most of the time it gets kind of stuck in oppression. Because the free will of actually allowing it into your body is an absolute must. With the rare exception of certain cases of soul victims, there is no way for the demon to circumvent your will. You have to agree to allow it. Doesn't mean you have to agree willingly. The coercion is definitely on the table, but you have to actually say yes. Once possession sets in, the activity generally focuses entirely on the person, and the person is going to go through hell. Everyone who knows who comes in contact with the person is going to go through hell. They will exhibit specific signs. There are 4 classic signs of possession, although there are many more that are also involved. The 4 classic signs are the ability to speak a language the person doesn't know. Circuit Man says that the way I describe it, oppression sounds a lot like from the guys from the movie Push. I have no idea. I've never seen the movie Push. But Anyway, but a person who is possessed will show knowledge of languages they don't know. You get a 6-year-old who suddenly can speak fluent Latin. Something really strange is going on. You get a woman who was raised in the United States who has no relatives from the area in question and no scholarly background in the subject who can suddenly speak fluent Serbo-Croatian. Something really weird is going on. And that is actually... The Latin things comes from cases I read about. The Serbo-Croatian, actually, I was involved in that case. I wasn't there when that happened, but I know someone who was. And heard it from the horse's mouth. I'd have him on to talk about it, but he's since passed away. But they know languages they shouldn't. Usually classical dead languages. The Serbo-Croatian was an exception because the person they were speaking to, it was their native language. So moving on to the other forms. Lou Gentili used to have a saying, and he was right. If you ever really want to meet a psychic, someone who will know shit they have no possible way of knowing, find someone who's possessed. They will know things they have no business knowing. Specifically, they tend to sins, that horrible thing you did that nobody else knows about, they know in intimate detail. The one notable exception there that's interesting enough is that they never, to my knowledge, there's no known example of a demonic spirit being able to ever reveal something that has been told under the seal of the confessional. That's off limits to them. Which is one of the reasons that people usually suggest going, one of the good bases of a suggestion, if it's part of your religious faith, if you're going into a demonic house, especially a case of demonic possession, go to confession. Because you don't want your dirty laundry dragged out in front of everybody else, and it will in intimate detail. They also will know other weird things. You'll get you have a priest with you. Your priest shows up in paint splattered overalls that look like they just got off of out of a day of painting their house, and introduces them as Joe, and never mention that they're a member of the clergy. And all of a sudden they look at them and go, "Hey, Father, how you doing?" They'll know about another case the priest did in another town 3 hours, 6 hours away, that the person in question had no way of knowing about. They know shit shit they shouldn't know. The last two of the 4 classics are superhuman strength, which is of course also widely associated with with people who are mentally ill. The reality is humans are capable of amazing feats of strength, even without mental illness. You hear the stories of a woman lifting a car off of her child and things of that nature, which is usually done through a combination. Oh, the Smurls. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm familiar with the Smurls. That was one of Ed Lorraine's cases. I'm sorry to hear they're still having problems. If they're still having those kinds of problems, they need help. But to give you an idea of how strong somebody possessed by a demon can be, there's a well-documented case of Maurice Theriault, who was a French-Canadian living in Massachusetts. You see his exorcism in the movie The Conjuring, who manages to lift a farming tractor off of the ground and hold it there long enough to change a tire. And lifts the statues much heavier than he should have been able to lift. He did this all the time. And normally, as I was saying, humans do occasionally exhibit superhuman feats of strength. But it's because your body, as I understand it, your body is actually capable of lifting much more than you normally do. Considerably more. The problem is that normally your body has built-in safeguards to prevent you from doing that because you'll damage yourself. Um, Certain exceptional circumstances can allow you to psychologically bypass those restrictions. And Circuit Man offers release human superhuman strength, or could they just be using levitation, telekinesis to levitate the stuff and move it around the person's with the body? It's possible. It operates like superhuman strength, so kind of we drop it there. Objects moving of their own accord is another sign. The last sign, which forms the basis for the classic test of someone who's possessed, is they have a violent reaction to blessed objects. You put a cross in the room in a place where the person can't see it. While they're out of the room, you bring them back into the room, and all of a sudden, for example, you hide it under the pillows in the bed. They won't lay on the bed. They'll freak out about the fact. And they'll talk about the fact there's a cross there, and they'll know exactly where it is, and they'll get very vulgar about it. And there's a whole series of tests of that nature. I don't really want to go into the nature of them, not so much because it's a trade secret, because doing these things, if you're not ready for it, is a really bad idea. Because if you have someone who's possessed and you do one of these tests, you're going to piss somebody who's many times stronger than you off. To the point that they're going to get violent. Do you need me to explain why that's a bad idea? I'll put it like this. Would you want to piss off Superman? To the point that he was willing to actually hit you with all of his power. The results aren't going to be anything more pleasant. But objects will move on their own. You'll hear voices come out of their mouth. Other than their own, you'll hear voices from the area around them. Claw marks will appear on their body. When this actually happens, things will continue to progress until one of two things happens. Best case scenario is a full formal ritual of exorcism will be performed over the person. Usually several full rituals of exorcism. Depending on how powerful the spirit in question is, it can take weeks, months, even years to break the hold the spirit has. And everyone involved is going to go through hell in the meantime. And I'm really not being metaphorical here. If, on the other hand, the whole thing goes untreated, you reach the fifth and final stage, the end goal of this entire process, this entire strategy. The end goal is most commonly called death, and it sums it up pretty well, although it's not always death. The person will kill themselves, and often enough they will kill multiple other people besides. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. is a real, from the Amityville case, is a great example of a case reaching the point of death. He brutally murdered 6 members of his own family for no good reason. If they can't set up to commit murder, they'll commit suicide. If you can stop them from committing suicide, the other standard go-to response for it is it's going to get them locked up in a mental hospital. It's going to push everything to the point where they lose their house and all their worldly possessions and are living on the street. It is going to ruin the person's life. Ideally, it wants to do that by pushing everything to the point of possession. If you can't get it to the point of possession, it'll just try to fuck everything. Excuse me. But basically screw everything else up in their life to the point that it's ruined in and of itself. But that's where all of this is going. People die. I've talked about it before. I'll talk about it again. I did a case very early in my career out in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And in it, all these horrible things were happening to this guy. But before they happened to him, they had happened to his wife. But because they only, like I said, they like to isolate. Things only happened to his wife. He didn't experience anything. And she was eventually, because he didn't believe her and wouldn't help her find the help she needed, she eventually was pushed to the point of suicide. It was after she committed suicide that everything started happening to him. I try to have a lot of fun in this show. I try to make some jokes and try to make it interesting and entertaining for everybody who's watching it. But there is a point to what I'm doing. There's a point to why I'm doing this. There's a point to why I keep going on investigations. Despite the fact doing so costs money and time and effort and usually requires taking off of work and all of these other things I can't necessarily afford to do. And this is why. People do die. People do wind up in psychiatric hospitals for the rest of their lives. People have lives ruined and destroyed by this kind of thing. There's a philosophical and ethical principle that if you have power, if you have knowledge, you have a moral obligation to do it, and I tend to agree with that. And I know what I'm doing well enough that I feel I have an obligation to do something. That's why we're all here, folks. Hosea 4:6 in the Bible says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." There's a knowledge of the paranormal is getting more prevalent, which is a mixed blessing. But there's a lot of nonsense out there, some of which is being spread by people who claim to be demonologists. That Patsy thinks that liking junk food too much means you're possessed by a demon. There is misinformation, there is wrong information, and this is my attempt to keep people accurately informed. As much as I may go down various strange roads here and things that are sort of off topic, this is what this channel is about. First and foremost is a wacky, creepy, weird shit that happens to people and how to do something about it. But yeah, there you go. Those are your 5 stages of demonic attack. So let's do some examples for pop culture. There are a bunch of well-known cases out there that you can find that fit the 5 stages very well. The most obvious. Excuse me. Let's talk Amityville, for example. The Amityville horror. If you read the book, the events that happen in the book are a textbook example of demonic infestation. It's a really extreme case. But yeah, pretty much that's what you're talking about there. No one in the Lutz family really reached the point of oppression or possession. If, on the other hand, if you want to read a more detailed step-by-step example of the process we're talking about, there's a very good book out called In a Dark Place. If you've ever seen, there's a Learning Channel series called A Haunting. The very first episode of which was A Haunting in Connecticut. Which was also about the same case. The movie The Haunting in Connecticut was very loosely based on it. The Annabelle case, for that matter, is also pretty good. It's a good example of possession, or not possession, of infestation that was starting to move into obsession. But in the Snedeker case, it's a pretty clear family moves into the house, family comes under infestation. The one kid, Bradley, just gets tormented and beaten down by the spirit, and to the point that he's becoming oppressed, and eventually, as far as from the book and other accounts I've read, he doesn't ever actually cross the line into possession, but he's well on his way. There is the case of Robbie Doe, which is a clear-cut case of demonic possession. If you want a cliff note, dramatized, exaggerated study of his case, watch the original 1970s movie The Exorcist, because he's what that case was based on. What you see in that, so The Exorcist, and I think, frankly, aside from next week dealing with what to do with your house is haunted, I'm going to wind up doing a look at the paranormal and fiction at some point down the road. Everything you see in the movie The Exorcist, as far as I know, with the exception of the head turning around, but everything else you see does happen in cases of demonic possession. It's worth saying that they don't all usually happen in the same case like that, nor do I, to the best of my recollection, did all of that happen in the Robbie Doe case. But what you see in the movie is consistent with what actually happens. What the demon says through the little girl is consistent with what demons say. Not for nothing, the movie had 2 Jesuit priests as technical advisors. There's a reason it got so much right. And if you go to the DeFeo murders, if you go to some of the serial killers I've talked about in that episode a while back, you can see, and if you go back in Kevin's Creepiest Cases, you'll hear the whole story about the woman who was driven to the point of suicide, to give you your examples of the death scenario. But that is the basic anatomy of a demonic attack, and a basic primer on what differentiates a ghost haunting from a demon haunting. You'll notice I haven't talked a whole lot about it, about the religious overtones of the whole shebang, or for that matter, and my definition of what demon is pretty vague, since I didn't get into fallen angels and things of that nature. That's by design, because, okay, I'm a Christian. I've never made a secret of that. So it's my personal opinion that demons are fallen angels. But it's not the only possible explanation. It's not even the only possible Christian explanation. There's also the simple reality of are there other things that I mistake for demons? I've been asked that more than once by by various magicians and other non-Christians I've spoken with over the years, and I don't know. Possibly is really my best answer. People tend to accuse me, and I think fairly, of I tend to over-associate things as demonic, and that's probably fair. But here's the thing. Demonology can be a very theological thing where you're getting into what are various spirits and whatnot. I don't really care. I'm a really practical kind of guy. There are basically 3 questions I have when dealing with a spirit. 1, is the house actually have a spirit in it? 2, is that spirit a threat to the people that are living in the house? If the answer to those 2 questions is yes, then the 3rd question is, what are we going to do about it? If there's no spirit in the house, everything else is moot. If the spirit in the house is benign, there's an argument and a case can be made that something should be done just to help them pass on, but that's more trying to convince somebody to move on than trying to force them out of the house. But on the whole, if if every morning you have the one chair at the kitchen table pull out and then pull back in like somebody's sitting down, but there's nobody there, and not a whole lot else, and you hear occasionally footsteps where there's nobody there, and murmuring and whispering, and nobody's there, and that's about the extent of what's going on. If it's a demon, it's a really well-behaved demon. It's not a problem. It's not something you have to deal with. If something's destroying somebody's house and ruining somebody's life, I don't care if it's a demon. I don't care if it's a fairy. I don't care if it's an elemental. I don't care if it's a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. The problem is, what are we going to do about it? It's entirely possible that some of them are something other than demons, and that's okay. I don't. In my experience, the things that work against spirits work pretty well, regardless of what type of spirit you're dealing with. Exorcism will work with fairies. Exorcism will work with elementals. It may take more, because elementals are fairly powerful. It may take more of them. If the person's life is in danger, you just fix the bottom line is you fix the problem, and leave the philosophical questions of, but what is it really, to theologians, philosophers, or you speculate about it after the case is done and you've moved on. I don't. So, have I misdiagnosed something as demonic that was actually some other weird type of spirit out there? Possibly. I don't especially care. It's not particularly relevant, because it's something that was surrounding a person, and I dealt with the problem. If the problem is dealt with, I don't care what it was. What it was is secondary. And I think that's in my opinion, that's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at it. Again, I certainly am not ruling out. I believe the universe is far more bizarre than even somebody with my fairly broad viewpoint gives it credit for. So there isn't. I'm not generally inclined. Usually, when people ask me, do you believe in spirit type X, spirit type Y? The answer is either yes, I've seen it myself. Yes, I've heard reliable accounts from other people who've seen it themselves. Or B, I don't know. Maybe. Because I'm willing to accept that just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think it's healthier to just leave. It's healthier to leave the door open to the possibility than to close the door and assume that everything's one thing or the other. And it's worth noting as well that not all as doom and gloom as the show gets, by design, admittedly, not all spirit activity is violent. Not all spirit activity is dangerous. Not all spirit activity is demonic by any definition of the word. There are very uplifting cases of paranormal phenomenon. People do experience angels. Let me give you a couple examples. Hey, Lord Ruin, welcome to the show, as usual. But there was a case Father used to talk about that I always really quite liked. There was someone in his congregation. That's odd, but yeah, I did start. I've been streaming for about an hour and 43 minutes now. As I started at 8:01. But yeah, so let's talk about this case Father had. Not even a case; it was more of an experience related to him. Guy in his congregation, good guy, who had his wife die and fell apart. Stopped eating, stopped taking care of himself. He was a mess. His family was worried about him. He just couldn't get over the fact that his wife of many, many years, who he had had children with, who had grandchildren, was gone. And he went to the Father and he's like, what's going on? I don't. The Father advised him to pray. Yeah, a Christian priest telling you to pray. Well, what a concept, right, my friends? But pray and ask for a sign. So he goes and he sits in the pew where they always sat, because they come to church every Sunday. And he knelt down and he prayed. He hears footsteps come down the aisle. He hears somebody settle down onto the kneeler beside him. Looks over, it's his wife. His wife tells him, You need to get up. You need to start taking care of yourself. You've got grandchildren to take care of. Basically verbally slaps him around and says, get your head out of your ass. And then disappears. He goes to Father shaken. It's like, I don't know if I'm losing my mind. Explains what happened. His father asks him the question, how did she look? Did she look like she did just before she died? Because when she died, she was very ill. Like, no, she was as beautiful as I've ever seen her. And the guy got his life together. The guy started doing what he's... No, to answer Lord Ruin's question, did anyone else witness this? And the answer is no, just this guy. And from a psychological standpoint, there were other explanations for what he saw. But the point is, he had this experience of his deceased wife that made his life... And he got himself off of the ground, and he started doing the stuff he needed to do to get on with his life. And there are a lot of stories like that. There's a whole subsection of human spirit phenomenon of people seeing someone shortly after they die. There's an Irish story I always find entertaining of a woman who loses her father, and she's just weeping and crying and just carrying on and on and on. And finally he shows up and he's like, woman, stop crying, I can't sleep. There's a very, very similar story. I think, actually, now that I think about it, I may read as a future forgotten fairy tale from Brothers Grimm, no less, of a little boy ghost who comes to his mother because his mother just won't let him sleep, won't let the dead rest because she can't get over her grief. Lorune said that he has a friend that saw his grandmother the night she died. Yeah, this is common. Often there's a theory in the paranormal, in theology, that when you die, you have about 3 days that you're hanging around. Now, this isn't a haunting in the conventional sense. They're not trapped here. But a person seems to be given about 3 days to make peace with what's happened. If the funeral happens soon enough, and often it does for this reason, they'll attend their own funeral. They'll see. Yeah, this is why often right after someone dies, their loved ones see them. And it's usually a very positive and happy experience. It's not scary. It's not terrifying. It's not a haunting because it doesn't keep happening day after day after day. It happens once, or it may happen a couple of times in succession to different members of the family. Or you see them in dreams and things of that nature, and it never happens again. So there's this theory that after 3 days, you move on after 3 days. There's a magical occult version of it that deals with what they call the second death and the etheric body, and I'm not even going to begin to go down that road because that's not really relevant to the discussion. But you do have this phenomenon where people will see someone who just died. Angels are another thing that does actually happen. People do see angels. People do have experiences with angels. People get entirely... Our culture is entirely too obsessed with angels in general. But it does happen. I did a whole episode on angels, so I don't necessarily want to go down that road. But just... It happens. Be aware of it. Don't go. The big mistake people often make is get obsessed by looking for it, or even praying to them as if they were deities, and angels aren't gods. But there's a whole host of weird things that happen out there. And not all of it's negative. Some of it's funny. Some of it's heartwarming. Some of it's just plain weird. And some of it doesn't seem all that, particularly with fairies and certain elemental spirits, they don't care that much about, they might have an almost academic interest in humans, but they don't care that much. We interact with them when we cross each other's paths, and that's about it. The end of the story there. Um, all of which is to say, if you run into a spirit, don't automatically assume it's demonic. Either as an investigator or as if somebody who has a weird experience. You have, particularly among Christians, this assumption that all spirits are demons. No, they're not. No, they're not. It's as much a mistake to say that all spirits are demons as to say there are no demons, which is another infuriating mistake people make. Especially directly related to that is the common modern misconception that demons are just something that we Christians invented to scare people, which is a hysterically funny position to take when you realize that the idea that demons exist is thousands of years old and predates Judaism, let alone Christianity. I mean, Babylon and Sumeria, which are the oldest cultures we have written record of anywhere, have demons in them. They're associated with disease and associated with bad luck and misfortune and various horrible things that happen to them. They call them by various other names. The Lilutru being the only one that comes to the mind off the top of my head. And Pazuzu, who shows up in The Exorcist. There's an irony with Pazuzu and The Exorcist. So you have this demon that goes by this name in the movie The Exorcist, attacking a child. If you know Babylonian mythology, yes, Pazuzu is generally seen as a demon, but strangely enough, he's also a protector of children, particularly because his wife is very much an attacker of children. Lamont's. Let me look this up because I'm not. It's annoying me, and I'm not remembering her name. It's associated with Lamashtu, who particularly was known to harm mothers and children during childbirth, so people would call on him to protect their children from Lamashtu, which all leads into and it's been suggested, and I think there's truth to it, that the use of Pazuzu is sort of a bit of fringe brilliance, and the whole idea of, well, you're calling on a demon to protect your children. There is a whole branch of Guisha, which is a particular type of black magic with the summoning of demons, that has the brilliant idea of, okay, you have a demon in your house, we're going to summon another demon. A bigger and more powerful demon that's going to kick the butt of your demon to kick it out, and that'll get rid of it. I don't recognize... Lord Ruin just asked about a specific demon. I don't recognize the name off the top of my head. I believe Lou may have talked about him at some point, but there are so many out there I can't even begin to list them all. And I would remind Lord Ruin that, like Lou himself, I generally have a rule of we try to avoid talking about demons by name, just because that creates lots of problems. If somebody's having a specific problem, I'll be happy to try to look it up, to do a little research. But otherwise, how do you deal with a demon is the same. With a specific demon with a name, it's the same way you deal with a demon whose name you don't know. Although it's worth noting that the vast overwhelming majority of the time, any name a demon gives you for itself is a lie. They don't give their true names. The reasons are there's usually a couple of reasons for it. The reality is, and this is a concept the magicians in my audience are well familiar with, names have, and for that matter, Jews in my audience will be familiar with this, and anyone who studied Egyptian mythology should be familiar with this. Names have power. Knowing the true name of the spirit gives you power over it, up to and including in an exorcism, in an actual full-blown exorcism. And let me say for the record, actual full-blown exorcisms are rare. They are the tactical nuclear weapon of dealing with demonic spirits. There are a number of other solutions to go through before that. And most of the time it's not necessary to go with a full-blown exorcism. But the break point of an exorcism is the point when the spirit's going to be going to get itself gone, is when you force it to reveal its name. Which is why they're loath to do it, and is one of several reasons why that if a demon ever gives you its name, assume that's not its name. One of the tactics I've seen them use, by the way, is they'll give you a name, but it's the name of their boss, or the name of some other more powerful spirit. And the logic is very simple. The more you use the spirit, and it's one of the reasons I don't use names on the show very often, the more you use a spirit's name, the more attention you give it, the more energy it gets, and the more likely the more power it has to eventually manifest. The less attention spirits get, the better as a rule. So, yeah, it'll feed you the name of its boss or another high-ranking spirit. You start using that name, often you start using that name obsessively, and now you've started out with one problem, now you've attracted the attention of something much worse. Which is also the basic flaw in the goetic way of dealing with demons, of we're going to call up a bigger demon to get rid of your little demon, and you've gotten rid of one problem by replacing it with a bigger problem. And then that's a good question, Lord Ruin. Lord Ruin asked, do they ever give the name of an angel? No. I'm not aware. Actually, no, I take that back. Yes. I know of at least a few instances where they will give the name of a very important angel. Usually when they're talking to people. But it's usually when they're communicating with somebody and trying to manipulate that person into doing what they want. Particularly what I'm referring to is that one of the most common spirits that people claim to communicate with through a Ouija board is the Archangel Michael. I'm very fond of the Archangel Michael. He is heaven's kicker of backside, as it were. He's the one who threw the devil down to hell. As my fiance knows, and I think I've said it once or twice on the show, yeah, Michael versus Satan was history's first curb stomp battle. Satan said, "I'm going to be like God." God said, "No," and Michael grabbed his ear and threw him out. Yeah, John Dee would be an example of someone who claimed to speak with angels, who may have spoken with demons. I'm going to wait for Drew to get back before we get into Dee, just because Dee is a really complicated, really fascinating subject. But what I'm getting at particularly is that a lot of people who use Ouija boards claim to be the board claims to be Michael or to be some other angel. Angels, if you are using a Ouija board to communicate with something, it's not an angel. It may not always be a demon, but it's never going to be an angel. Because here's the thing to understand about angels. A holy angel acts with the full power and will and authority of the Lord God. No mere human has the ability to tell an angel what to do. You cannot summon them. You cannot bind them. You can try to command them. It's useless. You cannot interfere with them. You cannot interrupt them. If an angel shows up, if a holy angel shows up, it's because of God's will, and it's going to communicate. It doesn't need a Ouija board to communicate with you. It can appear and speak directly to you. It can talk to you in your dreams. It can do any one of it can just speak out of thin air without ever manifesting. It can do any one of 100 other things to manifest to yourself. It has absolutely no need for a Ouija board. And if it isn't supposed to show up, if God hasn't willed it, if the angel doesn't have a particular reason to talk to you, there is nothing you can do to make it. In fact, in medieval Christian thought, summoning demons is blasphemy. Or summoning angels is heresy. Or basically, I think I'm mixing up titles, but basically, summoning a demon trying to summon an angel is an even worse sin in medieval Christianity than trying to summon a demon. Because by summoning a holy angel, you are claiming authority that is God's alone. And it doesn't work. Again, you can't make... Even magical... reading ceremonial magical texts, you ask an angel for help. And you ask nicely. You don't tell it what to do, because it's just going to look at you and go, really, human? You can't make them do something they don't want to do. Trying to is ridiculous. By the same token, if you have an angel in your life that's making your life miserable, and it's a holy angel, there's not going to be anything we can do about it. And if a holy angel's wrecking your life, you did something really wrong. That's a good question from Florida Ruin, which is, how does your patron saint factor into your duties of dealing with demons? When I originally chose a patron saint, way back in high school, so probably before, I know for certain, knowing the age of at least some of my listeners, and probably some of the rest of you, we're talking about before so many people were born, because I'm 40. I went through confirmation like most people, if memory serves, like 15, 16? Yeah. So we're talking about more than 20 years ago. I wasn't as familiar with things as I am now. I wound up choosing St. George. Honestly, knowing what I do now and the way I personally associate it, it's far more Michael. Your faith, be it Christian, Catholic in general, or Protestant, or Buddhist, or anything else, is cornerstone to how... no, it's not something that all Christians do. It's something specific to Catholic faith. I was raised Roman Catholic. I would assume Anglicans do it too. I have no idea. Protestants, not so much. I have no idea if Orthodox do. It wouldn't surprise me to find out they do, just because their rituals tend to be similar to Catholicism, because you're dealing with similar roots. Confirmation is sort of the Catholic version of a bar mitzvah. It's a recognition of coming of age and formally being recognized as a member of the church, during which you choose a patron saint. Usually around, I want to say around 16. Let me look up the... It is one of the 7 sacraments of the church. Pretty much all Roman Catholics go through this. Okay, so since... it is one of the sacraments that comes after Holy Communion. And it's actually been around for quite a long time. although the age at which it's done apparently has changed. But it represents basically reaching the age of where you're considered responsible for your actions. And it's formally becoming part of the church as a community. For those who don't know, Catholics have a series of sacraments, starting with baptism shortly after birth, moving up through communion and confirmation, and I don't remember all 7 of them, but marriage, taking of holy orders, aka becoming a priest, and last rites. And there's one more I'm not remembering. But yeah. Okay, enough with the Catholic theology lesson. It is now 10:06 p.m. I do have work tonight as usual, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for listening. There is, if you haven't checked it out yet, a new episode of Forgotten Fairy Tales up where I'm telling the story. Aztec story, I've butchered the name enough in the telling, so I'm not going to try to repeat it now. But it's a story of 2 lovers that turn into volcanoes. I highly recommend everybody look it up. It's on the channel. And I am out for tonight. I want to thank you all for listening. Remember, if you haven't yet, to like, comment, and subscribe. And I shall see you all next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday. Till then, good night, and God bless.